join in.
Yes. Yes.
All right, we should be going live here any second, so I'll get started. Really excited to be joined tonight by Laurier offensive line coach and now four-time guest Zach Scotto.
We should be going live here any second, so
You got the echo.
Yeah, it's all good. It pops up on my screen and we get the little delay. One of these days I'll have a smooth transition into one of these, but today's not that day. But like I said, just really excited to be joined by Zach Scotto, our first four-time guest, and actually the coach who did our very first video. So as we're closing in on 1,000 subscribers, that's it's interesting to reflect and look back, at how this all got started. And we did a great one with now CFL second-round pick, looking at Bryce Bell's pass stats a little over a year ago. So going to talk about something tonight that I think is really relevant, and one of the things that I think is most vital right now as we get back to playing football here in Canada is how can we bridge the gap, get people caught up, but also looking at with limited contact allowed. And, certainly here in Ontario, no contact football to be played in the next month or so at least, or longer. Hopefully in the fall we get back to some of that. But, being able to develop linemen, and tonight specifically talk about offensive linemen, such a technique-based position. And I think a lot of us right now are kind of at a loss for, hey, we can't put our hands on each other. We don't have pads on. How can we get back to developing, these players that are so critical to well-played football? And that's what Coach Scotto is going to talk to us from tonight. So if you want to give yourself a quick intro, I know you've been on here a few times. People probably know you well, but we can roll right into it.
For sure. I'm super pumped to be here. Coach Youngs and I were talking a little bit right before we got on here that the dynamic is a little bit different because we're not used to being live, and I'm not on the YouTube channel right now, so it's like I'm just presenting to Coach Jax. But I'm super excited to be here. One of the things that has been perplexing for a lot of people is how do I get my athletes better in a world that we're not allowed to do contact for a contact sport? And then looking at the trenches, that's an even bigger issue right now, because in order to develop as offensive and defensive linemen, contact is so vital to be able to put your hands on each other and to be able to hit each other with a pad, and even being able to get into pads. So trying to figure out ways to really build the athlete and help them with skills, help them develop skills that are going to help them when we ultimately will be able to be back in contact. And it's never going to be the same. It's obviously not going to be the same, but there are definitely things you can do that are going to help the athlete out, that are going to help develop skills that athlete can use to build from, putting tools in their toolbox that are going to be vital. Because when we're in season and when we're out of season, a lot of these things tend to go untaught, tend to go unworked on, because everybody's so focused on, we got to get into the contact, we got to do the contact stuff. And a lot of these foundational skills are actually things that get overlooked. So for a lot of people, including some of my guys, this is, as much as we want to be playing football, there are definitely positives to this pandemic of being able to focus on some of those foundational skills that have been overlooked. So super pumped to be here. As Jack said, this is my fourth time now. I had to count it off in my head when he said it. I hadn't even thought about it, but I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get going. Jax, I got you popped up on my screen. Before I minimize you, can you give me a thumbs up when it's still loading on my screen? But
you're good to go now. We're up.
Beauty.
We're up.
Thank you. I'm going to minimize you so I don't see you anymore and you're not in my way.
There you go.
So we're going to be talking about developing offensive linemen with limited or no contact. I got some film for you as well within this, so I'm going to be jumping kind of between screens. But some of it will be very, very minimal contact, in the sense it's going to it's going to be like a hand shield, and you're going to be touching a hand shield, which if you're in mass, you'll be fine. But then some of it is also, completely socially distanced, completely limited, completely no contact. So here we go. That's me. Feel free to shoot me a message, follow me on social media or send me a DM or whatever. Shoot me a text. I'm more than happy to talk at any point. I'm also the academic tracking coach. So if you're a coach out there looking to get some help on how to academically motivate your students, or systems to help them be academically ready for university, or looking for advice that way, I'm more than happy to talk about that as well. That's an awesome support system that we do at Laurier that I'm super pumped to be a part of. So whether you're looking for any offensive line development or questions or academic questions, I'm more than happy to talk about it, and we can set that up. This is kind of what we're going to look at. So, excuse me. We're going to look at building the foundation first. I'm a strong believer in building that foundation, and then having building blocks from that. And we're going to have film from each of those. We're going to talk about the mental side of it, the mental building block side of it. And we're also going to talk about the physical building block side of it. But we're always going to start with that foundation. So for me, looking at this, like I think about it kind of like building a home, that you have to build the foundation of that home. Otherwise, you won't have a very well-built home. Not one that's going to be worth living in. And in today's market, you're probably not going to get a lot of profit, even though it's a lucrative market, if you don't have a solid foundation. You have to build the foundation first. And when you face challenging situations in life, especially when you go into fight or flight in a physical sense, like you do in the trenches all the time, you are going to resort to whatever your most practiced habits are. So if you practice poorly, you are going to resort to bad habits. If you're a procrastinator, if you don't focus on your stance, if you don't focus on your hand placement, and you're not intentionally looking for targets, if you're not intentionally working on your mental health, all these types of things, when you face challenging situations, you will resort back to your most practiced habits. That is scientifically proven. That is a fact. There is nothing you can do about it. That's why people say perfect practice makes perfect, because you go back to your most practiced habits. That is fact. So when we look at our offensive line, what is it that we want them to have as habits as part of their foundation? They're going to be challenged on the field. They're especially going to be challenged off of it. What habits do we want them to have in place? Are they physical? Are they mental? Are they a combination of both? What is it that they're going to face? What habits do we want them to have in place? So for me, there's two sides of it. Both are controllable by the athlete. It all starts with mental first. That is something that they can work on all the time. But ultimately, it's up to you. I can sit here on my high horse and preach to you about this and that and this and that, but ultimately it's up to you as their individual coach. It's up to you as the coordinator. It's up to you as the head coach. It's up to you as a teacher. It's up to you as a leader of this young athlete to decide what it is you need to focus on mentally. And you can certainly co-create that too. I'm also a teacher, and having that student voice, having that athlete voice and involved in that mental makeup is really important, but it's ultimately up to you and the unit and the player to decide mentally what's important and what those habits are going to be, based around the culture of the position group, based around the culture of the unit, based around the culture of the team. That's what's going to set those habits. But physically, this is entirely up to you as the coach, because you have to train this. You have to coach this. So for me, physically, that foundation and the building blocks surrounding it evolve around these four things. So we're going to look at the stance. We're going to look at driving with force through, not to. We're going to look at controlled violence, and we're going to look at agility. And these are all things that you can work on without having any or very, very limited contact. When it comes to the mental side, we're not going to go through this exercise, but if we were, in a clinic or in person, this is something I would ask. But ask yourself, what are the scenarios that my players are going to face that they can actively practice their culture all the time? And what is it they're going to fall back on? So I'll use an example that Coach Yonkis and I talked about a lot with our Cambridge Lions program. Is it's very easy to talk big idea with culture. It's very easy to throw a lot of words out there, but when you're in the heat of the moment on the practice field, you need something quick. So we decided to create kind of buzzwords where we would explain it off the field, that this is what this thing means, so that everybody understood these 3 or 4 words, understood what the big picture was. So we could say, if we needed to get, a player back into the proper mental state, we could say this 3 or 4 word phrase and get them back into that mental state very, very fast. One year, the year we won the OVFL title in 2016, it was next play. Urban Meyer uses 4 to 6, A to B. There's a bunch of them out there, and you would get to decide that as a coach, but it's all based around the scenarios that your players are going to face and how you're going to get them into the mental state and keep them on the mental pathway that they need to be on in order to overcome those challenges and fall back on good habits. So for example, a lot of people like to talk about hard work, but what does working harder than anyone else actually look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? What are the behaviors that the athlete needs to actually exhibit on a day-to-day basis, on a rep-to-rep basis, to quote unquote work harder, right? What does that mean for them in their brain? we got to examine that on how we're going to help them understand that so they can actually have the correct habits of what you believe working harder looks like, sounds like, feels like. Regardless of what your foundations are, they need opportunities to intentionally practice them. Time under tension, you need to create safe opportunities for them to be challenged before they actually face the challenging situation. Otherwise, it'll never become habit. So whether that means, you're pushing them in indie, whether that means you're challenging them off the field with playbook stuff, whether that means, you have friendly competition, whatever it is, you get to decide, but they have to have intentional opportunities to practice it. Otherwise, it'll never become habit. And then we go to the physical. As I said, we're going to look at stance, driving with force through, not to, controlled violence and agility. Stance is the first thing I always start off. I got the pleasure to actually go with Coach Yonkis and Coach Herb Damon, who's now at U of T, to go listen to the guy who's on the screen, the Charles Bentley talk in Cleveland. And this one phrase right here, something that always stuck with me, efficiency is speed in the box. And if you have any wasted movement, you're putting yourself at a deficit that you're already in a deficit. As large humans playing against more athletic humans, we are already at a deficit. And if you have wasted movement, you're going to put yourself in an even bigger deficit. And why would you ever want to be in a debt, right? Why would you ever want to be in a physical debt or a debt of any kind? It's not worth it. You need to be efficient in order to be fast in the box. And if you're looking for something to kind of give you more specifics, I'm actually going through reading this. It summarizes a lot of the stuff that we were very, very privileged to listen to him speak at in Cleveland. But it goes into some of the scientific basics, some of the mental sides about how to actually coach offensive linemen and offensive line athletes, I should say, to biomechanically and mentally get them to where they need to be. I'm working through this one right now. I'm really enjoying it. But as I said, it's something that we kind of already had summarized in a 2-day presentation in Cleveland. So if you're ever looking for something to help you and have something to reference, this would be an awesome thing for you to look at. But when we're looking at stance, it's so often the most underworked part of an O-lineman's foundation. Everybody that's ever played O-line has the story of how they were taught to get into the stance, right? It's, bend over like you're sitting on a toilet, stick your hand like you're playing in the dirt, and make room for your belly, right? Like Jax, do you want to talk about your situation? Like, I know you've got a story about that when you were taught it.
I played O-line and D-line, so I was in high school. So like many people do, and I was kind of rushed, into the O-line world. And I just remember I'm trying to remember the specific story you're recalling here, Coach Scotto. We've been hashing these things back and forth so much. You know more about me now than I do myself. But I just remember, like, basically once you had like a good enough stance, because especially at any high school, no matter how good the high school is, and I was fortunate to play for a great high school team, but once you have like a decent stance, you rarely are going to get coached beyond that, because now you have a decent stance. There's 8 other offensive linemen. You're probably better than at least 6 of them. So those 6 guys, the coach has all their hands full, just trying to get those 6 guys in a decent stance. Yeah. Right. So I think it's one of those things where people hit a ceiling, and then the ceiling in that fundamental ultimately limits how much better they can get. But I just remember it being so rushed, and basically, get your palms on your knees and then put your hand in the dirt. And, as long as you weren't offside or, but too high in the air, you were all right. But yeah, no,
hit the guy hard.
Undervalued skill. That was one of the first things, when I got to university, that you notice, like, man, like, I've spent my whole life playing football. I don't know anything. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, how have I even gotten here?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So as Coach just said, it's one of those most underworked skills, right? And when we talk about skills, like, skills are something you have to intentionally work on. And stance, whether you're a first-time offensive line player or you're a 4th-year All-Canadian, stance is still something that you have to stay on top of. It's a practice skill. Your body's going to change over time. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get injured. You're going to have changes. You're going to get taller. You're going to get bigger. You're going to add weight. You're going to lose weight. Over time, you still have to work on your stance all the time. So, for example, Coach Jax talked about Bryce that got drafted in the 2nd round this year. Bryce was always tinkering his entire career, and then now he's adding center even more to his game, and he's tinkering with that all the time. Like, every day he's working on that, trying to find the little bit that can help him, whether it's moving his foot up, up his stance or down his stance an inch, raising his butt up or down an inch, leaning over with his shoulders and back, forward or back an inch. Finding every little piece is massive, even though, the guy got drafted 11th overall and he's still trying to fix it and make sure he's at his best. It's a practice skill, and it's not something that, the athlete just goes and does on their own. It's something that as the coach, you have to have ideas in your head of what are the cues that they need to exhibit in order for them to feel correct. So every body is the same, or is different, sorry. Not every body is the same, but they can all have the same cues. They can all have the same body feel, right? But philosophically, if we're going back to that foundation idea, the stance is your true foundation. If your foundation is cracked, the house will fall. So I have very little chance of success if I have a poor stance. I have a much larger chance of success if my foundation is strong, if my stance is strong. If I have an efficient stance and a strong stance, I give myself, the athlete that is at a deficit on a football field, the most opportunity for success. Anytime we step foot on the football field, we want the most opportunity for success. The best way to get there, not the easiest, but the best way to get there is to have a good stance, to have an efficient stance. So these are some of the things that I use that I'm looking for. And a lot of people, as I said, like have the story of bend your knees, think you're sitting on the toilet, and put your hand in the dirt. And I just read this quote from the Charles Bentley in his book, like, everybody thinks you need to get lower, you need to get lower, you need to get lower. Has anybody on this call ever at any point felt strong at the bottom of a squat or while you're sitting on the toilet? It's just not a thing. Like, you don't feel strong there. So why would we use that as a coaching cue? That's not a position of strength. And biomechanically, you can look into it. Biomechanically, it's not a position of strength. But why would we ask our athletes to pretend like they're sitting on a toilet when that's not a position of strength? We're not leading them to success. So we need to be mindful of the cues we're using to help them be successful. So I'm looking at the chin. That's probably the first thing I'm looking at, to be honest, especially with young athletes. I want to make sure their eyes are up and they're looking at the defense. You only get one brain. If you don't take care of it, you're not going to be playing football very long, and you're not going to have a great long life. You got to be able to see what you're trying to hit so you can keep your forehead out of it. We're trying to keep the shoulder blades pinched. I don't want like full retraction, but I want that back engaged. I want my hips and shoulders square to the line of scrimmage. I want my kick knee inside the big toe. So my backside foot and my backside leg, I want that knee inside the big toe. My kick foot is going to have a subtle angle out. I usually talk about like 130. Some guys are at 1, some guys are at 2. Really depends on the person. I want palms on the knees. For me, palms on the knees and keeping that shoulder girdle kind of engaged allows me to keep everything in the shoulder girdle, chest area engaged and be powerful. And then I want my elbows tight to the body. I don't want big flare. Anytime I have big flare with my elbows, it ruins the chain of force that I'm establishing through my entire body. And I end up only being able to use my tricep instead of every piece of force that's being applied throughout my body, down from my ankles, up through my hips, into my shoulders, and in through my hands. When I flare my elbows, I break that chain. So I'm going to switch my window here, go to the film. I'll try and keep it slow as much as I can. If you're teaching somebody to get into a stance the first time, this is how I do it. It seems kind of silly that they're starting with their heels together right now. But I personally like it this way because I could set one foot and keep it in the ground. So I'm going to keep one foot in the ground. In this instance, these guys are going to be moving their left foot. So they're going to be getting into a left-handed stance. So they're going to start with their feet together, and they're going to basically put a little bit of extra weight on their inside foot. Not to say that they're going to be 60-40 or 55-45. It's just to let there be a little bit of room so that their outside foot can fall. And all they're trying to do is get to a comfortable position somewhere around shoulder width, right? Shoulder width is kind of the base. Some guys are minus an inch, some guys are more than an inch, some guys are bang on, right? You got to let them play with it. They got to find that position of power. Then I'm going to ask them to bring their foot back. Some of these guys are a little ahead, but if we're looking at this one, we're going to start with a base of bringing our foot, our backside foot, our kick foot, the big toe to about the midfoot of our front foot, our post foot. We're going to start there. Again, vertically, some guys are plus minus an inch. We got to find our position of power. And then, as I said, we're going to have some of that foot tilt. So if you see right here, you can see the foot tilt and you can see my foot tilt. I talk about 130. Some guys go to 1, some guys go to 2. If you go past 2, you're a very, very weird athlete. But if you feel strong there and it works, right, let it work. And then we're going to put our palms on. And at this point, you can see our hips are not square to the line of scrimmage. Our hips are not square to the line of scrimmage. But then we're going to lock. Remember, we got to have that knee, that kick knee inside our big toe. So what you're going to see is them lock that knee in, and that puts us into a position of power. From this point, we should be squeezing the adductors and engaging the glute, and our elbows should be tight into our body. Our shoulder blade should be holding that $50 bill, and we should be ready to go. So we do that at a left-handed stance. That's a side angle, which we don't need to worry about. We do the same thing out of a right-handed stance. I teach my guys both stances all the time, 100%. You need to be versatile and be able to play both. Right? You can really see it with him right now, how far angled away he is, and then you can see him get all squared up. Right? That's a gorgeous stance. That's a first-year kid who just learned that this year. You can see it really well from the side cut. So he gets parallel, foot drop, foot pivot, palms on, bend it down, lock it in. Gorgeous, right? This is an example of a kid who had never learned this ever in his life. And over the course of a year, he got really, really good at it. Less than a year. This is an example of a guy who's probably more of the minus an inch, right? That works for some guys. And then over here on this back end is a guy who's probably more of a plus an inch guy. So then what we can develop eventually is walk-ins. We call them walk-ins, where we're just going to walk up to the line of scrimmage and get in the stance, right? He's more of a plus an inch guy, plus he's probably about a 1 o'clock guy. We're going to walk into the stance. He does it out of the left hand as well. And this is kind of building the skill of being able to get into a stance on the line of scrimmage, right? And then we can build it up with more guys where we're actually going to walk out, get into the stance as if we're at the line of scrimmage. And then we can build it out where we're then going to, quote unquote, break the huddle. One of my guys being a little silly, right? We get a little bit of pep in our step and we break it into our stance. And now you can see his stance is affected a little bit. It doesn't look quite the same. So he's still working on this skill, right? Whereas the other guys are a little older and they're a little better with it. And then you can see it. I got on them after that first rep. Give me some pep. You're breaking the huddle. And they get to the line of scrimmage. So this is a skill you can work on with your guys right now, right? You could go out on a field after tomorrow or whatever the date is that we're allowed to do that again, right? You can go out on a field and do this with your guys when you're allowed right now with no contact, and it's a skill you can work on. And then I go progressive fives. So we get into the stance and then we quote unquote, it's like a get off, right? Where I'm going to get off. I don't really like these get offs, but it's more so just to get them out of the stance and back in it. We're not focusing on any specific steps or anything like that. So that's how we can progress through the stance. Go back.
I love the comment about it being a skill. Again, I think a lot of people think like, hey, I'm a U Sport football player. I know how to get in a stance. Every play starts with a stance. You know, I'm a scholarship athlete. I know how to get in a stance, right? But again, if you were to look at your players, like no one's ever going to watch a game film and go, wow, we ran 70 plays and I liked all, 350 stances of my 5 offensive linemen. Not one time was the stance not what I wanted. Not one mistake, came from whether it's, and a lot of the times, like we would talk about this, and we had the benefit of spending so much time in the same line room together. So you get the coaching points over like 4 years, you start to realize which ones are meaningful, and it was, hey, that step was an inch too short because your stance was 2 inches too wide, right? Yeah. Or that first step was 2 inches too long because your stance was too long. So you wide stance, you have to take a long step to get out of it, right? Yeah. Or we talk about, you can't be explosive out of a position that's not efficient, and all of a sudden look at what that translates to, and people make the coaching point, you got to move your feet, get lower, get off the ball. Like those are all general non-prescriptive things. And I think, you mentioned how, we spent that time with Irv down at that clinic, and, you know, a guy that we both played for and both worked with, that was one of the things that I always respected a ton about him is he spent very little time saying things that weren't meaningful, right? Yeah. Like it would be, hey, your stance was 2 inches too wide, right? And that was something you could change in the moment, your next rep, instead of going into that next rep going, oh, I got to get off the ball or I got to move my feet, right? Yeah. Well, like it's not like I got in my stance and thought, you know what, I'm going to try not moving my feet on this one. Let's see how it goes. I just think it's, if there's any athletes watching this, like I hope there are, I put it out on our Cambridge Lions channel too for guys, like it is a meaningful skill. It is a meaningful skill. And if it's not practiced, you won't be excellent at it like anything else.
And that goes for every position, like every position on the football team. Like if you talk to advanced position coaches, like university position coaches, they will work on your stance. That's the first thing they will fix. They don't care, you know, if you're a receiver, they don't care if you don't break at the 12-yard in very well, right? They don't care about that unless your stance is good, right? You got to make sure your stance setup is good first, right? That allows you to have more success. Okay, so we've done well in the stance. Now we got to actually play. Right now we got to drive with force. And I talk about doing through, not to. So a couple different reasons there. But what does that actually mean? This is the example that I could think of. I figured using a video is a better example, and most of you got.
Yeah, I've seen that clip a few times this year.
I'm sure most people have seen this once or twice. I might as well, since I got 8 seconds left, I got 2 more clips of it. I might as well.
Same foot, same shoulder, baby.
Now, don't get me wrong. Every block is not going to look like that. That's a 1%er of the 1%er. Trent Williams is one of the best offensive line athletes in the world, right? He's one of the best offensive line athletes in the NFL, which is some of the best athletes in the world. But the reason I talk about driving with force, and specifically driving with force through, not to, language is extremely powerful when you are trying to coach an athlete or teach a student or help somebody learn something. Language is extremely powerful in the same sense that I talked about earlier of like, what does hard work actually mean, or what does working harder than other people, than everybody else actually mean? Language is incredibly powerful. And so often in the offensive line world, we talk about stepping, you know, our first steps, or our stepping to an angle, or stepping to a spot, or getting to a spot. And that language can be subconsciously impactful on the athlete, right? Like if I tell them they need to get to a spot in pass protection, that doesn't mean they're going to win the rep if they get to that spot. There are still so many other things that need to happen, right? That's just part of it. And if I leave it at that, they may say, well, coach, I got to the spot, but I still lost. What's wrong, right? Well, so many other things could happen. Maybe they're in a bad biomechanical position to take on contact. Maybe they're in a bad biomechanical position to divert forces or apply forces, right? There's so much more than just getting to a spot.
We got a good question here, Coach. I don't want to, because this is a good question. I think a question, there's probably a lot of people who are either watching this now, or as you know, more people watch this as it goes. This will come up. From Coach C, do you always go from a 2-point stance, and what in your experience has led you to teach or play from a 2-point stance?
Yeah, I always do a 2-point stance personally, especially with young athletes. For me, like we're in Canada, we're in 3-down football. We're gonna pass the ball a whole lot more, and you know, hopefully nobody takes this offensively. And I'm gonna use a little bit of bad language here, but the idea that being in a 3-point stance allows you to have more leverage is total bullshit. That's old school offensive line, and that's, you know, the quote unquote the way it's always been done. To me, in my opinion, I think it's lazy, and I think it shows a lack of development in trying to develop your athlete. You can play with more than enough leverage out of a 2-point when it's done right, just the same as if you teach a 3-point correctly. I have nothing against a 3-point, but the reason I do a 2-point personally, especially for younger athletes, is if over time, when you become fatigued in a 3-point, and I've seen it way, way too much, the hips tend to rise in the stance and the forehead tends to lower, and they start looking down at the ground, or they start looking only at the D lineman's hands because they're tired and they're trying to catch their breath, and they're not paying attention to what's in front of them, and their head becomes a more prominent part of contact. as they get tired. And if they're more tired, they're more likely to get injured, especially with their head. So for me, out of a 2-point stance, it creates a more natural way to keep the head up, especially when you're tired. So for me, that's the driving force behind the 2-point. But to me, like, you can create plenty of leverage out of a 2-point, more than enough leverage out of a 2-point. And we play in a passing league and a passing version of football, with it being 3 down. So hopefully that answers your question without offending too many people.
I would throw in this, and again, me and Coach Scotto both played together, have coached together, coached summer football together. So we've had like a million conversations about this. And for me, the 2-point stance is a teaching tool. If you can get in a great 2-point stance, you can very easily progress to a great 3-point stance. And we wouldn't go, on the goal line, we're not sitting in a 2-point stance. And a 2-point stance is also not like the Joe Thomas, 3rd and 12 2-point stance, right? Like, I would also throw out that we've led the OUA in rushing. I say you guys now have led the OUA in rushing. I don't know, 3 of the last 5 years. We've been either in the top
team or individual.
So it's not that we're also not running the ball, because I don't want people to come back and go, oh, he's a pass guy, whatever. The teams that both me and Zach have been associated with run the ball pretty well. But I think, especially with younger athletes, like you said, and I found this for me, it was incredibly beneficial, is if you have any like hip tightness, getting your hand to the ground without ruining the rest of the work you've done to be in a good stance, like really, I think has a big impact. And, as we go through like some more clips and you show some more, even just guys pre-snap, like in the stance, you can highlight some of the things. And we've had guys play out of a 3 down, but I think especially for young athletes, it's one less thing you have to do correctly to have that proper foundation. And we've seen absolutely zero evidence that you can't run the ball out of it, right?
Yeah,
whether it's
100%.
kids in the summer or, running the ball. Like when we were at our best, we were last couple of years, inside zone, power, all the things you want to run out of, a 3-point stance, get your hand in the dirt, double teams. We've had 2 all-Canadian running backs in the last 7 years because the O-line's done a good job up front, right? So it's a great question, and I think it's something that more people should look into. Again, you get, like you said, you get into that whole like, oh, it's always been done that way. And I think there's some like inherent thoughts about the 2-point stance that it is more of a pass deal. Whereas for us, it's more of a being in an efficient movement position deal, right?
Yeah.
Especially with the D-line being a yard off the ball, the first thing you do is take your hand off the ground. So for everyone who's always like, well, you need to have your hand on the ground, well, you immediately remove it from the ground. So what's your connection with that? But like you said, it's not that you can't have a good 3-point stance. It's that having a great 2-point stance is easier and as effective, in my opinion, as having a good 3-point stance.
I agree. And as Jack said, like we've had people playing a 3. Like we just had a guy who started 3 or 4 years. He was a second team all OUA who played out of a 3, but he had to prove that he could be in an efficient 2. Excuse me. And this is kind of my rule. If you can prove that you can be in an efficient and powerful 2-point stance, I'll let you put your hand in a 3-point stance, following off Coach Jack's point that you've now put your body in the correct position. Putting your hand in the dirt isn't going to ruin all the work that put you in that good position. So if you're more comfortable, if you feel better with your hand in the dirt, I want to know that your body is in the correct positions first, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, I just got to stick my hand in the dirt and then lean out of my stance and go hit people. That works sometimes in high school, especially when you're better athletes, but the older you get, the less it's going to work. So I want to make sure your body's in an efficient stance out of a 2, and then I'll teach you how to put your hand in the dirt, because it's, as Jack said, it's quite simple to go from a good 2-point to a good 3. Hopefully that answers your question.
Also in the chat, future Laurier offensive lineman Jordan Sy commented about taking notes, so I thought you'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Jordan. So this is kind of long, and it's kind of, offensive line is basically physics and geometry. It's applied geometry and a lot of other things that there's some Irvisms out there, Jax. But it's all to do with forces, and the laws of physics dictate that if I want to get to a certain place in a specific direction, right? If I want to apply a vector force, I have to deliver equal and opposite force to propel myself to get to that spot, wherever that spot may be. So as an offensive lineman, in order for me to do my job effectively in terms of working through specific angles, everything I do has to be about delivering forces from my body to other places or other people, and controlling forces within my body and controlling the ones that are being applied to my body. So there's everything about how we play is to do with force, everything, right? A lot of people, for example, teach inside zone, the way they see it, and the way that Coach Yonkis and I see it is a little bit different than other people, which is a little bit different than other people, a little bit different than other people. I don't work on quote unquote inside zone angles. I focus everything about angles and forces. And the same way I teach like gap scheme is about angles and forces. Everything is about forces and the directions that they're being applied. And that's how we need to play, right? So I need to deliver and control forces that are being applied from my body. And I need to control and divert appropriately forces that are being acted upon my body. Because everybody likes to talk about, I've actually luckily Jordan's on this call. I've talked to Jordan a little bit. Jordan's an incoming Laurier recruit coming in to play center next year. I talked to Jordan about, he's talking about training and getting better and getting stronger. And I was like, the big three lifts of, bench, deadlift, squat are all important. Don't get me wrong. But when are we ever on a football field where I can pump, me personally, I can pump 225 for 20-ish now, maybe. When am I ever going to be on a football field in a perfect position, right? Like I sit on the bench and I lock my shoulders in, my hips are in place, my feet are firmly planted on the ground. I got full control of the bar, and I got full control of that bar through the entire set of the reps. When are we ever going to be in a football field in that situation? That's not realistic. And don't get me wrong, those things are important, but we need to teach our athletes how to divert forces, independent hands, up, down, side to side, different angles, in and out. Same with our feet. And we need to be able to match up independent feet, independent hands. It's a very, very skilled position, more so than people ever realize. And it's all to do with forces. So we got to teach them how to drive with force. And this one isn't as much about diverting forces. Diverting forces is very much more, you can use bands. I didn't have bands, which I don't have film on it, but this is much more teaching our athletes how to drive with force. And what Charles Bentley always talks about, force through the ground. In order for me to propel in any angle, I have to apply force to the ground in an equal and opposite direction to get where I want. So the first thing we do, if you have med balls, this is great. If you have weighted balls, this is great. If you have nothing, this is completely fine too. You don't have to do this with med balls. The only reason I do this with med balls for my guys is just to get used to having their hands in specific spots, when we're delivering force to the ground to get us a specific spot. So the first one, we're going to go on one leg. This is simulating driving in a certain direction. I just want them to get the feel first. So we're not actually leaving the ground. My guy in the middle here, he's a first year. He actually messed up the first rep, and he leaves the ground. I don't want guys to leave the ground on the first one. I just want to get to the feel of loading up, right? Contracting their muscles, and then putting pressure through the ground with control, which is why I don't want them leaving ground, because it's not about applying maximal force. It's about applying the correct and appropriate force. So this one is just about feeling it. So we do 2 reps, we switch the feet, and we do it again. Notice that all those efficiencies we talked about with the stance in terms of the upper body, my hips and my shoulders are square. My elbows are still tight to my body. My hands are in a good space, and my chin is up, right? All those things that we talked about that are important in our stance are now applying through the course of certain reps. You can see it quickly from the side. And ideally, we're able to do this without being able to put our foot in the ground, right? That's a balance thing, a structural strength, a functional strength thing in our bodies. That if you have a guy that can do this whole progression without ever having to put their off foot on the ground, they are very, very ready to be a good offensive lineman. That is a hard thing to do when you see what we're going to next. So now we're going to leave the ground. So now,
question here. Sorry to break your rhythm there, Coach.
Okay, no worries.
I just know you're going to roll for the whole hour, and I won't get too many stops. If I don't get you on a water break, I won't get any. When you speak, of force application and levers, joint mechanics certainly comes into play. How much, and I guess how do you emphasize flexibility training with guys in your group?
Big time. Talking to them about it all the time. all the time. One of my first years this year, I'll tie it to mental health, and I'll tie it to creating structure. In the pandemic, it's obviously extremely difficult for athletes because we're so structured as human beings that without our sport, a lot of that structure was taken away. So this first year athlete during our academic tracking meetings was struggling with his sleeping patterns. And I said, you need to create a nighttime routine that's going to help you trigger your brain into this is time to sleep. Me doing this thing for 45 minutes or a half hour or however long it needs to be before is telling my body, tricking my brain into get ready to go to sleep. It's time to go to bed. And for him, that was stretching. And he's turned it into a habit now that he and I are not meeting for academics anymore because we're in the summer and he's working, and he's like, Coach, I stretch every day. That I literally roll out of bed and go to the ground. Like, I don't stand up, I go to the ground and I start stretching. Obviously I'm telling him, like, you can't push anything. I don't want you to hurt yourself because he's cold. But he stretches, and then he stretches again right before he goes to bed at night. And that's part of his nighttime routine, part of his morning routine, waking up. So stretching is definitely important. Mobility is super important too, joint mobility. The more flexible and the stronger you are around joints, the less likely you're going to have acute injuries. So flexibility and mobility are definitely extremely important. Good question. Anything else, Jack, before I get back on a roll?
No, you're good.
Okay. So now we're leaving the ground. So now it's about maximal force, and we want this to go straight up and down. So what we should see is we should see the athlete's foot land pretty much at the same spot they started with, and they should go full maximal, right? We should get full extension through the joints to get them as high as they can get through the into the air as we get into this one. So you can see here we landed pretty much in the same spot. Here we landed pretty much in the same spot. Here we landed in pretty much the same spot, which means they're applying forces appropriately. Then it's about being able to then catch that force and divert forces appropriately through our body. This is giving them that feel of, if I get bull rush or I get pressure on one of my shoulders or I get pressure through one of my sides, how am I able to divert that force through my body, right, and control it? Because that's what offensive line is. And again, you can see all three of them. Oh, I got a little toe tap from one of my guys, a little toe tap. And we get perfectly straight up, perfectly straight down, and a catch. Then we switch our feet, right? We do that at both feet. And sometimes you'll be able to see, we can see this athlete's ability to catch on that other foot isn't as good. And this guy burned out on that leg a little bit. Don't need to see it from the side. Then we can do it with some angles. So now we're going to bound it. They're a little preemptive. So now we're going to load into one leg. So now it's the same thing. We're going to drive with force, but we're going to go through a different angle. So now we're going sideways, and now we got to catch it. So now we have different forces acting upon our body and different forces coming out of our body because of the angle we're working through. Things that we talked about make a good offensive lineman in our stances. We still want to do that as we catch. And I just got an alert saying my internet's unstable, so sorry if I get choppy.
You're all right now.
So for me, I do it a couple each side, just off of the commands of ready, go. You can see my guys burning out a little bit, getting frustrated because he's tilting. That's all that was. We got a side angle, which we don't really need to see. And now again, we'll do it again where we're working off different angles. Now we're going to work on 45s. And I let them do, because of the space available, I let them do this one at their own pace. Make sure you stick it, right? I'm talking about catch it, catch it, catch it, stick it, stick it, stick it, right? I want maximal force both vertically and on that 45. And I want you to stick it without having to put your foot in the ground every time. And I still want that same thing with the med ball. I still want our chin up. I still want our lats engaged. I still want our elbows tight. And I took them for maybe 10 or 15 yards. You could do this with a med ball. You could do it without a med ball. You could do it with a weighted ball. You can do it with tennis balls even. You can do it with anything you want, right? Just focus on making sure those hands are up.
And the nice thing is it's not about the weight, right? Like you could be doing this, like, one thing I look forward to, and I don't know if we'll end up ever getting to do this, But between me and you eventually coaching some 10-year-old offensive linemen, I can't wait for this in the park. Other kids are going to be shooting hoops, and Scotto Jr. is going to be sticking the bounding lunge with the bat. It won't be the med ball, though. It'll be the basketball at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So like we can see a difference here. Again, a younger athlete still getting used to it. You can see he has to use the weight available to him to brace to be able to get him there. This is going to apply to this is going to translate, to poor force reallocation through my body, as opposed to this catch, which is going to be a little cleaner. Right. And this is just a young guy. He can do it. This is just a young guy not fully understand what he's trying to get asked of him. And I'm sure I had some words with him after, like, hey, this is what it needs to be. And he fixed it.
You got another good question here from Ben Baxter. Are you focusing on hand position on the med ball during these drills?
Yes, 100%. So you can see a little bit of a difference, again, from the young guy to the older guy in terms of where the forces applied are. So for the younger guy, you can see he's kind of holding it a little more on the side. And I kind of let him get away with it a little bit just because I want the main focus of this drill is much more on the lower half versus the upper half. But as you get older, right, I don't want you blocking with your palms into each other. That independent hand thing we talked about is going to become a lot more difficult. But B, the meaningful contact I'm going to get with my hands and the ability to feel pressures and forces through my hands is going to become a lot more difficult when my hands are here. In addition to this, I know some people teach the up and under, and that's typically where this hand placement comes from. I personally don't like the up and under because it makes you way more prone to holding calls. So if you look at our history, ever since Irv was with us before and since I've taken over, we have very, very few holding calls because we never go up and under. We very, very rarely are ever actually grabbing underneath the shoulder pads because it's just, like, in my opinion, holding is a stupid penalty to take. And you don't need to take it. And there are ways, again, you can drill that skill that they don't have to do that. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great
question. So in terms of this drill, it's not super specific, but it is something I build into all my drills. So you can even see here, like this one, the hands being up in this drill is specifically so they don't push off their leg. And doing stuff off the ground is awesome. You can do this all from stance too, which is what this progresses to. But I have them as if their hands are already out of their stance, so they have to isolate that leg. And what we should see is that back foot should land in front of the line of scrimmage. That is visual confirmation that we are gaining ground on an appropriate angle. And the second cone, we should be right underneath our midpoint, our base of support. That is both visual confirmation that we're applying appropriate force. We're not losing ground. We're not bucket stepping, for lack of a better term. We're not going negative. And we're taking an appropriate angle. So we're delivering appropriate force and we're taking an appropriate angle. So this is a great rep and our hands are in a good spot and we get a great finish, which is awesome. We can do that both ways. I get guys circulating through right at the camera. Garrett's mug, what's up? Right? Whether you're a shorter leg guy, a long leg guy, all the same. And then we can do the exact same thing. Now we build it out of a stance. So we've been working on that stance as a skill. We apply that same feel, that same driving force. We do that out of a stance now. And we do it out of a left-handed stance going left and right and a right-handed stance going left and right. Right? We're working on all these skills that are very applicable to O-line and not at one point yet have we made any contact.
Now, here's one thing, because I know if there's athletes watching, and there are, one of the things I'm pumped about right now is there's actually a fair amount of athletes watching this. When you go to do this, you see these guys get out of the stance and they're moving quick and their hands are up and they look like offensive linemen. When you talk about a great finish, I know right now we're talking about generating power, but there's some good clips here for, just general movement as an offensive lineman. Like, we've talked about how you want them to start the drill, and I know it's a 1 hour deal and we're not, going to be on here for 4 hours, but what are you looking for? So Bear gets a great get off, right? You love the application of force to the ground.
Yeah.
What are you looking for as he finishes this rep? Because I think I can see a lot of people doing this, at their high school and doing little parts of it right, but missing a lot of the big stuff.
Yeah. So we should never finish in a position of out of control, and we should never finish in a gradual increase in terms of our or in terms of our pad level. So it should be like good pad level, good pad level, good pad level. I'm done, and now I get out of the drill. right? We want to make sure that our quote unquote, our finish is always with good pad level, good hand position. Some guys will take it even a step further where like Braden would get, he's not doing it because the film's there, but he would get to this spot and he would hold it and freeze it to make sure, and this is something you can do as coaches, where I'm going to freeze the drill to make sure that they're in full control of their body at any given point. So if I freeze it, you should be able to have your foot in the ground and you're not going to lean and fall over, right? Because if you're leaning and falling over, that means you're not actually in control of your body. You're trusting gravity to do the work for you, which isn't a good way to play. Now Braden here is doing it this way because of the camera, and he's, you know, lucky for me, he's not running into me because I'm on the camera here. But we should always finish with that low pad level, and it's essentially a confirmation of my body is in the position I want it to be in, right? Nobody ever wants to be standing up on a football field. You are going to get hurt, or you're going to get ripped, or you're going to get benched, right? None of those things we want. So why not practice finishing in a body position we actually want to finish in on a field? Good point, Jack. Thanks. And then we're doing this out of the run. We did some inside zone angle. Now we're going to do some outside zone angle, right? There's some applicability with outside zone that would be different here, but in terms of the driving through an angle, it's all applicable, right? It's the same thing, but now we're just driving through a different angle. And then we can also do it as I work through here. We can also do it out of the pass. So now we're going to be with a med ball. We can start hands on a med ball. We can do this with a med ball, without a med ball. Here I did for the pass, I did palms on. I still don't want them to push off the knee, but I did palms on for this one to really emphasize the pass fundamental of being able to have palms on our legs and then get the hands up to protect ourselves in the pass game. And you can do that with a med ball too, to add a little bit of weighted resistance. But the same thing here, we're going to drive off of our backside foot to get ourselves to a spot, and then we're going to hold it, right? And we want all those things. We want our hands in the right place, our inside knee, our toe curl, all those things. We want all those things to be consistent, and those are all things we can see. And then I do it with 2 drives. So now we're transitioning from a ground to a standing, and then we do it out of a stance. Eventually, we do it both sides. And then now we do it out of stance, where we go set 1, and then we go set for 2, drive on an angle, hands get up, and we should finish in the appropriate body position. Cool. Now let's talk. Last 5 minutes, coach. I said I'm gonna be rushed.
Hey, you're good. If we go a little over, it's fine. My audience is used to me going a little over.
Controlled violence. This is the one that most people actually spend the time on, right? Like the violence of the position, the contact of the position. Offensive line is a violent position. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I'm not going to mince words about that. But offensive line is an artfully violent position. Inherent violence, inherent aggression doesn't lead to success of the offensive line position, in the sense that it's not a chaotic position, right? If you are just inherently violent or inherently aggressive at the offensive line position, you're probably actually going to lose more than you win. It's actually, in my opinion, this is why I coach offensive line. It's a beautiful art. So everything you do must have intent and purpose. Every time I put my hand in a specific place, I should be looking where I'm trying to put it. Every time I set or I drive on a certain angle, I need to know why I'm doing it. Every action must have intent and purpose. That means not every action is in itself going to be violent or aggressive, right? I need to be efficient and get to where I need to get to, because if I'm doing that, that is what's going to allow me to be violent and aggressive and most successful when I need to be violent and aggressive, when I need to be, right? I don't need to be inherently violent or aggressive until first contact and finish. If I am efficient getting to first contact, my first contact opportunity will be more successful. If my first contact opportunity is more successful, my finish, which is where the most violence and the most aggressiveness is typically seen, has the opportunity to be more successful. That all comes back to everything you can control before contact ever happens, right? Driving with force through not to, having an efficient stance will allow you to be more successful when the violence needs to come. Best example I can ever think of is if you go watch any football highlights of offensive linemen and you watch Quentin Nelson, this guy is the best at doing it. He is so incredibly patient with everything he does. He's moving with force. He's moving with speed. He's moving with passion with how he plays. but he is not inherently violent and aggressive until he has to be. And everything he does before he makes contact allows him to have those highlight blocks that everybody sees. Like everybody talks about that block where he was playing left guard, he sets out and he helps at the end, and then he comes all the way back across the entire offensive line to wipe somebody out to protect his quarterback. The only way that allows him to happen, because he's in an efficient stance, he's in a good body position, he understands his scheme and he understands his timing, and he is intentful and purposeful about his movements before contact. That's what allows him to have that violent play and that highlight reel play. And if a guy like that is doing it, there's probably a reason he's doing it. I mean, he's been an all pro every year he's been in the league. So if you're going to emulate anybody, probably a good one to emulate. Let's look at some film for it. So I drill the control piece of it a lot, right? I would rather you be efficient and fit up than just purely violent. So here we're looking at it at the pass, where we're going to work 3 different angles. So the whole idea is that we want to be efficient in our movements and understand our angles, but still have the end result. So we're going to start with a quote unquote regular angle, a tight angle, and then a wide angle, but I still want the same result. And all we're doing is I call it setting to a target, right? So we're not actually going to be in contact, but we're just setting and making sure we have the visual confirmation that we want to be where we want to be. You can see here with my hands, I tell him he's got to get a little more over, but he doesn't quite get to the spot. That time he gets to the spot where I want to be. So I use the line here to help us. I want outside hand around outside pec. I want inside V the neck, and I want prick to hip relationship. As a tackle, it changes a little bit just because of the amount of space, and he's a tackle, which is why he's playing a little bit under compared to that. So now you can see that he changes his set. He changes how he gets there. So when we went regular, he took 2 drive catches to get to his spot. And then when we go tight, he understands this angle and he only goes 1 to get to his spot, right? This is that next level play. This is that efficient movement we're talking about. It's not just working through angles, it's driving to a specific angle. And then we go wide, and now he's got to change his drive angles so that he can be violent when he needs to be violent. And then we can do that through every position. So as a guard, I did this as regular, I did this as tight, and I did this as wide. So we're getting to a spot. We're controlling and being efficient in our movements so that when we need to be violent, we can be violent. So here you're going to see him take a really tight set, right? 1 little drive, appropriate force, right? And technically you don't even need, like, he's got a body opposite. You could do this against a goal post. You could do this against a fence post. You could do this against a tree, right? All you need is some type of marker, and you could do this on your own, right? Be like Quinn Miners and go work in the forest of Ontario. And then we'll add a little bit of contact. This one I didn't particularly like because we're getting a little bit of shift of weight over the outside foot. What I was trying to simulate here is we've already gone through our set, and you can tell we got a young guy, our older guys telling him how to do it a little bit. We're trying to simulate we've already gone into our pass set and we're getting contact. It looks a little cleaner when we get a little wider. That's a little better. We got to have a better finish position. So all we're doing is focusing on the same foot or the near foot at the same time as the hand, right? We want to have that transference of power, right? Our young guy's still working through it. I don't want him working through the hand. And you can see his hands are up here to simulate we're already in the set. This is a way better rep. This is probably one of the better ones, where we're getting same foot, same hand, and we're in that position of power where our lats engaged, our elbows tight, our knees inside the toe. We got our 130 here. All the cues, our chin is up. We're seeing our target, all the things that we wanted that we talked about before. Now we're applying it into contact. And then again, we can change it through different angles. Right, everybody's gonna have their different punch targets, right? That's totally up to you. Everybody's gonna have their different things. I'm not gonna harp on that. And then that'll be the last one. And the very last thing is agility and change of direction. So depending on your athlete, you're gonna have to figure out what your athlete needs. There's a difference between change of direction and agility. Eventually, you want your athlete to be agile, right? So the difference between change of direction and agility is based on having a stimulus or not. So change of direction, you know the stimulus, you know what's going to happen. It's pre-planned. They both require similar biomechanical demands, right? You need to accelerate, you need to decelerate, you need to reaccelerate in order to change direction. But where agility differs is that it's in response to an unknown stimulus, right? So the drill I'm going to show you here in a second, it doesn't have the unknown stimulus, but it can progress very, very easily to having an unknown stimulus. The whole idea here is you need to learn how to walk before you run. So as the largest humans moving quickly, right? We are the largest people on the football field, and we're trying to move very, very fast in very efficient ways. Teach your offensive linemen how to change direction first, so that they know what's expected of them. They know the directions they need to move so that they can get it right, and then introduce a stimulus. A small stimulus before a big stimulus, right? Have them just change direction, but they don't know which direction they need to change to. Then you can have change of direction or agility with contact, and then you can have agility with contact with finish, right? Then you can have agility with contact with change of direction in contact, right? There are things you can progress to, but teach them how to walk before you teach them how to run. So this is how you teach them how to walk, offensive line style. You can set up any cones in any direction you want. Use all the skills that we talked about before: efficient stance, driving with force, and we're going to be catch, we're going to be drive, catch. We need to decelerate and change direction. And then we're going to finish, and it'll look a little bit weird coming with the camera. So now we're starting off the ground. Again, you can do this from a stance. This is a progression off of the drill we already did. So we're seeing all the cues we want to see. We're getting them over that cone on the midpoint, and then we're finishing through that rep and finishing the drill. Let's use my shaky camera work. We're going to drive, we're going to catch, we're going to decelerate, and then reaccelerate through our target. The way you progress, this is probably the best rep we have here. Boom, decelerate through the target, finish. The way that you change this to progress to agilities, to have an unknown stimulus, instead of this cone here, have a human there, their feet together, try and occupy the same width, and then have your fists up together where they're either going to point left or point right. So you're going to tell them what direction they need to go. Don't give it to them late. Our rule is if you're the pointer and you give the point too late, the point doesn't exist and we're going through you. So that's your fault. Give it early enough that they can see it and adjust to it, but give it late enough that they can actually apply it as a stimulus. And then eventually what you can do is you can have the human, the pointer there, have another human here with a bag, another human here with a bag, and then he's going to direct to have to get into contact, and the drill can finish there. The next progression off of that is you're going to have to get into contact and then divert forces pressure to pressure in any angle the defender wants to apply it for you. So I know I went a little bit over. I have more of these clips if guys want to stick around and look at them, but that is right at the end, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, question time.
If there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. There is about a 15-second delay from when we get the, I don't know, maybe that's my internet, but from when we get the question from when you fire it in there. So I'll give people a minute or two here. Thanks, Coach, for doing that. It was great. If you've watched, you don't have any questions, just even throw where you're coaching from or whatever in the chat. The more comments and the more likes on the video, the more YouTube will populate it out so other people will see it and help the information get to more players.
Punch that bell, man.
Sorry?
Punch that bell. Click subscribe. We're close to 1,000.
I know, it's really close. We got 2 more. So the Fighting Zach Scotto fans out there have helped us out, which is clutch.
Go tell your family. Make a YouTube account. Follow 3 down, even if they don't use it.
Yeah, appreciate it. If you got a work email, that works too. Found that out. So yeah, appreciate it. Another good question here. Instead of the med ball, is there an alternative you could use for those drills?
I mean, it really depends on what's available to you. At the end of the day, it would depend on what you're trying to get out of. It would depend on what you're trying to get out of it. So you can modify the drill, like if you have bands and you can put bands around hands. There are modifications you can do with that. To be honest, like even just like tennis balls, like having like there is an old school adage of like literally putting a tennis ball between your hands and then like rolling it. A lot of people talk about like rolling meatballs. To me personally, I don't like it a lot because it forces your hands to be really, really tight. That's more of like the up and under style. But if that's what you're going for, that's a great opportunity. Um, there's another one too. You can stick, I don't have any in here, but you can stick a tennis ball underneath the elbow and then you have to maintain that it's pinched. This is a Scott Evans classic, Jack.
Yeah.
You have to pinch it between the elbow, so the funny bone of the elbow and your rib cage, and that'll force your hands because like the second if I'm pinching tennis balls or hockey balls between my rib cage and my funny bone, if my hands fall inward, the tennis balls will fall. So you could do that as a hand replacement too.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. And I think a lot of the other thing too is like it's not like the med ball adds some of the like realistic weight that you're and the counteracting force is the wrong word, but like when you're doing these motions, you're usually applying pressure with your hands. So it's just a good builder, for making sure my weight's not coming too far forward, my arms aren't going all over the place. But it's not like you lose the value of the drill because you're not holding a 10-pound med ball. Like when you're talking about, the mechanics of putting force through the ground, the weighted aspect of it is minimal. You know what I mean?
Yep.
In terms of the benefit, especially the younger the player is, right? Like there's probably a huge, portion of people watching this where you could do this with no weight and it would be just as effective for younger players. Because they have so much work to do in the fundamental, just, like you said, like just putting, pressure through the ground. So I wouldn't be discouraged, like, oh, I don't have a med ball, so I shouldn't do these drills. Like really, to me anyway, the mechanics of safely, efficiently putting force to the ground. If you have a med ball, great. Like you could do it with a basketball if you just have a hand position. You know what I mean? It would not be a crazy, diminishing of the value of the drill. Lots of people just saying thanks, appreciate it. Everyone who's watching. Another question in here: when you were working on the single leg drill, how much do you coach your guys on the push off of the instep, posture, and balance?
I mean, balance isn't necessarily something I coach intentionally. It's something that happens. That's something that's more of like weight room and conditioning and core work. It's something that you can work on, obviously, using balance boards and isometric isometric lifts and stuff like that. But in terms of the drill itself, balance isn't really something I work on. Posture for sure. You heard me talking about having the shoulder blades pinched, right? Those lats engaged and elbows in a certain spot and chin up and all those things. The posture is certainly important. But the instep is big time important. That's something that I didn't necessarily mention on here, but I talked about it a little bit in the stance, where all the studs need to be in the ground. That is something that needs the same thing with elbows tight and hands in certain spots and your chin being up and your lats engaged and all those things that I talked about in stance. Same thing goes with your studs in the ground. Don't watch NFL offensive linemen. That's what I will say. Don't watch NFL offensive linemen, especially when you're looking at their stances and their heel is, you can read the label on the bottom of their cleats. That is the 1% of the 1%. That is not an efficient movement. Over time, the more you push through your big toe, the more likely you're going to get turf toe, the more likely you're going to get injuries in your feet, the more likely you're going to get cramps in your feet, you're going to ruin your feet, and you're not going to get good force output. The more studs you have in the ground, the more likely you're going to have success, the more likely you're going to deliver appropriate force and be able to take on and divert forces appropriately. But for me, actually, I don't really focus specifically on the instep. That's where I want the force application to come from. But if the pressure is of the knee inside the big toe is there, the instep will naturally happen. The instep becomes a natural thing that you don't have to actually teach. So for me, I'm talking about adductors and glutes and keeping that knee tight and engaged. The same process as the elbow flare, right? If my knee flares, I break that connection. So I focus a lot more on making sure that knee is inside the toe and how to do that mechanically than I do thinking about making sure they're pushing out the instep, because the instep part of it comes naturally from it.
Yeah, it makes me, we did a great episode, which is one of the episodes that should have been watched way more. One of the things with this channel I've realized is sometimes it's just like if you post an episode on a lucky Thursday, it gets 500 views. We did an episode with Rob Williams, who runs QB Motion and Sport Court Performance, and he's probably the best top 10% kinesiologist in the world, right, in terms of sports movement. And for football, he's like in the 1%. Just a brilliant guy who is great at taking really complex ideas and putting them into meaningful, whether it's drill work or just explaining how movement works. And he always talked about, in my talk with him, he always talked about keeping movements as proximal, like talking about proximal movement, right? Starting in the middle of the body, right? He's talking about the core for the quarterback, right? And I think, hearing you talk about how the knee is going to affect the foot. If the knee is right, the foot's going to fall into place, right? It's kind of like coaching a quarterback. He was talking about how they talk about flicking the wrist, and he's like, you do 97% of the stuff you need to do before you flick the wrist. Don't worry, about flicking the wrist until everything else is perfect. And I think, it's not that, you obviously, the force has to come from the instep, but you're going to get that by talking about the knee, right? Because you're not going to, if the knee is outside of the foot, right, you're not going to get that either way, right? You can want it to come off the instep. It's one of those move your feet deals, right? Like it's not going to happen unless you get the proximal movement strategy in there. So if you haven't, it's not just about quarterbacks. Rob Williams, Sport Core Performance, check him out on Instagram. Not a sponsor, but great guy and great coach. Check that out. Check that video. It's got like 180 views. It should have 10 times that. Incredible interview. Another good question here from Coach Ken again. Do you work on ankle flexion with your guys in the off season? And I guess the next question would be if you do it, and I know you do. If so, how?
Yeah, the easiest one I've done, that was a big one. There's some band work you can do, but again, not everybody's got a band. But everybody's got a fist and a wall. Start with a fist length between your toes and the wall and see how close you can get your knee to the wall without lifting your heel. And if you can do that, you are one of the more flexible ankle athletes. To be honest, the majority of offensive linemen struggle to do that. If you put, my calves are super tight right now, so if you asked me to do that, I probably couldn't do it. Jax, leave the comments in your own brain. But start with your fists on the ground between your toes and the wall, and keep your heel on the ground and try and touch your knee to the wall. If it doesn't work, you need to work on some flexibility and mobility stuff. To be honest, YouTube and Google are going to be your best resources there. I don't profess to be a professional when it comes to ankle mobility. My main resources were our athletic trainer at the time, Jen Martins, who has unfortunately left us. She has gone to be a professor at Sheridan. Shout out Jen Martins. Good for her. And I also use offensive line performance. So Charles Bentley has some stuff on his website, and we are a subscriber to his website. So I use some of that stuff too. Most of it is banded stuff, but honestly, just like calf flexibility on its own and Achilles flexibility on its own can make the difference for you on its own. Yeah,
it's a big one, and it's one of those things. Again, you're talking about like the big three are important, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that's important. That's a big one. If there's no other questions, I'll give it a minute. I would assume I always get to the end of these videos, and anyone who's still watching is definitely already a subscriber. But if you're not, we're 24 away. We've had a big day on that. We can start making $18.50 a month, and I can pay for my Canva subscription maybe or something with that. But it'll be a big deal for us. So thanks, Coach, for coming on and talking about it. Next week we're going to be talking about 7-on-7 football. Phil Edworthy from MVP is going to be on to talk about that. Also a former colleague of mine at Laurier. But as we get back into coaching football, we're going to try to do some episodes here about some things that are applicable this summer. And I'm so happy we got a chance to do this and talk a little line play. I got to do more line stuff. This is every time I do one, I'm like, man, I should be doing more of that. So we had huge numbers on people watching, so it's great. And it doesn't look like there's any other questions in the chat. Awesome. Coach Baxter from London. Appreciate you the questions. Coach Ken, great questions. Other guys, awesome questions in there. And I'm sure we'll drag Coach Scotto back here sometime soon. But appreciate it. And again, share this, send it out, send this stuff to your players. It helps us. It all helps us. We're like one Bantam team away from having 1,000 subscribers. So if I could get, we're a starting lineup away. I got to tweet that. Well, we're still 24. I'm a starting lineup away. So appreciate it. And Coach Scott is super accessible on Twitter. His stuff is up there. I'll tweet out his stuff when we refine this video and put it out there. But if you have any questions, reach out to Zach. Great dude and great offensive line coach. So appreciate it. And